I'd like to thank our guest right now for stopping by and setting this one up for us. On gas prices, they're targeting so-called corporate greed at the pump. He has an article at the American Spectator right now on gas prices, simple economics, Trump's Biden's partisan agenda. He is an associate professor of economics at Texas Tech, comparative economics research fellow Alexander Salter joining us on your 956 Drive Home. So what's the deal with the prices at the pump? How can you break it down for us?
I can break it down very simply. It all comes down to supply and demand. Basically, prices are going up. That means that consumers are going to scale back their purchases. But here's the key. There's not a lot of great substitutes for gas, not a lot of great substitutes for fossil fuels. So if prices are up 10%, quantity demanded by customers falls less than 10%. That necessarily means that oil companies and gas companies are going to make more money. But it's due to market forces, not corporate greed. This is just how markets work.
And so why is President Biden honing in on gas companies right now?
Because he's got a political axe to grind, and in some circles it looks pretty good. It's really easy to blame the corporate greed bugaboo, but if you really take that story seriously, does that mean that we have to give corporations credit for benevolence when gas prices are low? I don't think that anyone would buy that story. Again, when you have a global market for a commodity like oil, it's just not going to be the case that the greed of one or a small number of corporations, no matter how big, can impose their will on the market. It just doesn't work that way. Too many suppliers, too many demanders.
Davis Rankin, your question for our guest, Alexander Salter, Associate Professor of Economics over at Texas Tech University.
Yeah, Professor, I think we agree with you, supply and demand, until I see evidence to the contrary. But why do you think people in the administration, this will sound like a silly question, but it's not. Why are the people in the administration, if it's so clear, supply and demand, that it works everything else, but it doesn't work with oil and gas, why the people in the administration, the shot callers, why don't they believe that? Or don't seem to believe it?
That's a great question. My simplest answer is that it's part of a larger perspective, a larger paradigm that really wants to push for a transformation of the American energy sector to embrace green energy. Now, I admire the environmental concern that motivates a lot of these pushes, but at the same time, we have to look at practical reality. So much of our energy comes from fossil fuels that if we wanted to push to renewables as fast as the administration wants to, it would be a significant source of economic disruption. The American people know that. The administration knows the American people know that. So I think that they're trying to build a political coalition to sustain that push. And that means that they're not afraid to bend the truth a little bit, economically speaking, if it comes down to that.
But they're down here, I forget what percentage of the population lives at or below the poverty line, but it's a lot. And these increases across the board got to be making Christmas looking pretty bad. They're not hurting the oil and gas people. They've made their money, but they're hurting regular folks.
I think that's right. If you look at any price hike, oil, gas, food, shelter, take any price of a good or service that's going up, and there's a lot of them right now, that's necessarily going to hit harder families that are living on smaller budgets because any given price increase eats up a larger percentage of that household budget. So I'm sure that the administration is doing what they think is right for the American people, but when you look at the fact of the matter, they're objectively hurting the American people and placing the burden disproportionately on the least among us, those who are least capable of bearing it.
Yeah, I like alternative energy, but I don't like it at the cost of, putting the thumb on the scale in preferences that seems to be going on right now. Our guest is Alexander Salter, Associate Professor of Economics, Texas Tech University, our guest on your 956 Drive Home. We're talking about the state of gas and the economy right now. And as far as, oil production is concerned, and we've been tapping a lot from the oil reserves, and there's just a lot of bad ideas that are going around right now. Do you think we're in a situation that is recoverable? Are we still in that stage, or do you think it's just all downhill from here?
I think it's recoverable, but it is going to require some soul searching on the part of the administration. At the end of the day, if you want prices to come down, the best way to do that is get quantities produced and sold up. But in order to do that, the administration is going to have to step off the gas in terms of the regulations, the fees, the restrictions on drilling, the leases that they're restricting. All of those things are going to have to go by the wayside. Can the administration actually make that sort of a change now? Well, now that the midterms are over, they might not have the political albatross around their neck, but the question remains, are they actually willing to do what's right by the energy sector? And this is a crucial time for it, since we're not just talking about price hikes, although that's bad enough. Energy has significant geopolitical implications right now. This is a world game that's being played, and right now the administration simply isn't doing it very well.
I have a question. Me, Coach, me? This is not to suggest that Mr. Biden is not fully in control or making decisions about policy. But having said that, do you know, is it known who in the administration is the shot caller on this, the prime mover, the intellectual architect of this retreat from supply and demand? I mean, basic supply and demand.
Another great question. That one I couldn't pinpoint you on. I know that a lot of these efforts are coming through EPA, Department of Energy, Department of the Interior, and we know that the president, although he's a public-spirited individual, has always been, when push comes to shove, been willing to be led by the more stern and sure-footed voices in his party. Right now, the Democratic Party is very much in the grips of far-left progressivism, where this idea that we need to completely detransition from fossil fuels is sort of received wisdom. So I think that the president is doing what he thinks he needs to do to hold together his political coalition, and he probably also thinks it's good for the country. I just don't think he's thought very much about the basic economics of the scenario.
Yeah, but I gather, I mean, I asked the same question about immigration policy. Who is making the decisions? It's not the larger decision to allow or to not do something to stymie the people coming over. What do you think? Do you have any insight into what oil and gas people think? Not just the people at the top of ExxonMobil and Royal Dutch Shell or whatever they call it, but also the pumpers, the people who go out and get the oil that they then sell to the big companies.
I'm sure that they're hurting too, because right now all across that industry, what we're seeing is that costs are actually rising faster than revenues. And so what that means is that costs of access to capital going up, trying to find workers, those costs are going up. It's really hard for this industry as a whole, big fish or small. So part of that is the general economic environment, and frankly, that is beyond the president's control. I think that we give presidents too much credit when the economy is good and blame them too much when the economy is bad. But there's also a lot of sector-specific problems right now, to the extent that those are causing general phenomena, input costs rising faster than output costs. That's going to be something that necessarily is going to be policy determined. So the administration could change that if they want to, but I won't hold my breath.
Yeah, and the idea of a windfall tax, and no pun intended, is like putting gasoline on a fire for all of this, correct?
And they're not going to get it through Congress. I mean, I'm Mr. Expert. I realize I sound like that, but I cannot fathom that would get through Congress. So
that would be extraordinary if it got through Congress. And then again, the president did just try and spend $400 billion of the people's money without Congress on student debt relief. So now, who knows? Maybe he thinks he can do something fancy with an executive order.
Wouldn't you like to be president and have executive orders and not have to mess with all those prima donnas over there?
Yeah, they need to stop giving him a pen and replace it with a rubber stamp. Professor, thanks a lot for your time here.
You.
That's Associate Professor of Economics Alexander Salter. He's got the article out at the American Spectator on gas prices, simple economics trumps Biden's partisan agenda. He's our guest on News Talk 710 KURV, your 956 drive home.